So inshallah, we'll have maybe an hour and a half of this material I'm referring to, and then some time for question and answers. But we're open. I'm open if any point along the way you feel you questions or uncertain about what I'm talking about, or just anything you wanted to bring up or question, let me know. Be somewhat fluid here. I want to say that I'm very, and I'm going to use this term right now because I use this term, I'm very right brain oriented. So when people expect a very sort of structured, expect more of a poetic presentation, okay? Which is not as structured as a lot of people might find, and they'll say, well, you're going off on this tangent, and that's my style. So, but that's the nature of our being in some way, I would suggest, in the true sense. So, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I can never begin a lecture or a talk with anyone without beginning with Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah. Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah for all the gifts and generosity that Allah has provided for us that we become blind to because of what becomes routine, which is never really the case. Nothing is ever routine. What I'd like to talk about today in this short time will be basic introductions to something I'd like to give a little more detail about on the upcoming workshop on next Saturday, is it? Is it next Saturday? Yeah, the 15th? Is that 15th? The 15th. And that'll be day long. And really, as I say, the material that I'm talking about is almost any one of the topics that I could discuss today. We could go on in detail for weeks. This is the nature of this particular work. The work is medicine. I'm a Hakim, and to say that I'm a Hakim is pretentious. I make no claims whatsoever. Allah is a Hakim, but we do our best, and Allah has provided us, as I said, with so much more than we appreciate. So much more than what we appreciate. And we become kind of dead to these realities of how awesome it is to be in this particular world by Allah's design. And then we become somewhat inured or dead to the principles or the ability to understand and recognize just how awesome this is. If for any one of us we were to grasp for even a tiny bit the awesome reality that we find ourselves in right at this moment, we would not be able to contain it. We would not be able to contain it. It would be an amazing Allahu Akbar and an annihilating kind of reality. At this moment, in every single one of us, there is not 1,000 processes taking place, not a million, not a trillion. There are processes beyond numbering taking place at this very moment in every one of us in order to stay alive by Allah's command at every moment. And by His command to sustain that balance of being and presence in His creation, which is true for everything He's placed in His creation. Every single thing that He's placed in His creation, by His command, remains what it is, by His command in every moment and every instant. So what's going on right now inside of us, we're not aware of it. We can become aware of it. One of my teachers said if we could make 3 steps with total consciousness of what that entails and what's going on, we would have some sort of arrival or overwhelmed. To be overwhelmed by reality is more befitting the true nature of this business of being in this world. And we're not. And the point is not to be in this world alone, because we know this is only one step and one piece of the journey, which will continue. So, as I speak, a lot of things that I talk about, as I said, I use this term right brain. People know this term right brain, left brain? Anybody not familiar with that concept? I don't see it. Everybody's familiar with it. It's a concept that came about many years ago, and then very shortly after it came about, people said, oh, no, it's not true, it's not true. Well, I think modern sciences, kind of the neurology, people in neurology have kind of reevaluated and say, yes, it is. This is a reality. And the reality has been confirmed by brain imaging, in which they can actually identify that the right brain is active in certain circumstances and the left brain is active in other circumstances. One of my theses about all of this research that I've done for as long as I've been working in medicine and as long as I've been alive, really when I was a teenager, my place of refuge was the library, and I studied physics and I was interested in science and taught science for many years at the high school. But when I was flying here, I had a person to my left from Amsterdam to Cape Town. There was a man to my left who was an actor. And he's actually a really interesting man. Some of you may know him. He does this very active social work with black communities in some of the shanty towns. I'm not sure what you call them, townships. You know, bringing the youth into activities like sports and education and feeding people and things of that sort. Very active, social, very noble work this man does. So that was his work, but he was an actor, and he said, you know, I'm an actor, and for him, the word in literature was his kind of arena. And to the right of me, I had a physicist who was coming to give lectures at the university on, you know, very sort of complex, modern things about neutrons and I don't know what. Again, it's the left brain business. But I had this, on my right I had a left brain person, on my left I had a right brain person. So I thought, wow, well, amazing thing. And of course we got into a conversation in which these things meet. What we want to be able to do is to have all these aspects of our being meet. So one of the theses that I have is, that I mentioned a minute ago, is that to me in some way I've seen with my own personal research that modern science is finally beginning to catch up with our traditional ancient wisdom. And it's as if I could say, well, maybe science itself will catch up to Islam. And maybe, even more so, maybe the Muslims will catch up to Islam. And recognizing the depth and the wisdom that's there, that's overlooked. And so in my medical research, my work with clients and with people, which I've done for over 40 years, I've not only kept my fingers as well as I can on the pulse of the modern research, but also working with clients and with people and referring to what I've learned in Islam, seeing what in Islam have we not noticed maybe that support the modern research. It's huge, it's huge. So in the short time I have today, I want to stress this concept that's an ancient concept of the self. I've been involved, recently there's a renewal of something that's been going on for many years, which is Islam and psychology. And they've had, since the time Freud sort of hit Cairo and the Muslim world, there's been these people who have said, well, what's our Islamic psychology? Do we have space for people?
Yes, sir.
Please do come. That's nice that we don't have enough chairs. I'm pleased. Alhamdulillah. So there's so much I would love to share with you all, but one of the things that I'm aware of right now is I see all these faces and I can feel the attention you're giving me, and I appreciate that. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful for the enthusiasm of the community that I've come to. And the people that I know have been instrumental in infusing this community with that enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm is a great word, English word. It means, people know that the roots of that word?
And fills. And fills.
Filled with God. Yes. Presence of God. Experiencing the presence of God. Not a bad thing. But I'm so thankful to people getting together in a very short time that I've had to come here, to arrange these gatherings in the workshop. But this enthusiasm is something I want to talk about in this whole principle that's now in the modern neurology, but it's in our tradition. Now, as I say, Islam, science catching up with our Islam. One of the things I love recently, is anyone familiar with the lymphatic system? Any doctors here?
Yes.
You know the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system, how long has it been since we've described the lymphatic system?
I mean, centuries.
I'm sorry?
Centuries.
The lymphatic system.
No,
No, not the lymphatic. Lymphatic system we know well. The lymphatic system is part of the body that enables it to do many things. Most importantly, we want to detoxify the body by the flow of the lymph and the fluids in the body. The lymphatic system is something very new. It's only in the past 5-10 years. But the lymphatic system is something that was discovered recently. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this idea that science catching up with Islam, that the lymphatic system is a very fine system of flow from the lymph cells in the brain that enables the brain to detoxify itself. Up until 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that, it was not clear that while the brain had this extraordinary activity of combustion and fuel burning and so forth, that how was it detoxifying itself? It was not clear until they discovered this system very fine system in the brain that enables that incredible activity and combustion that takes place up here in the skull, brain, to detoxify itself. And it's called the lymphatic system. Now the beautiful thing about it is they discovered that this system works best when you're lying down or when you're lying on your side, not when you're lying on your back. And we might assume when you lie on your right side or sleep on your right side, it's going to work better. It also functions greater when we weep, when we cry. These things are all in our tradition. If we look closely and we understand them, and we take them from more than just, we just sort of. One of the other hadith that I like to point to a lot for understanding that's often overlooked is the famous hadith in which people say, everyone refers to this, 1/3 food, 1/3 water, leaf from everybody. We all know this, right? But what's the first part of the hadith? You know this too, but you've forgotten somebody? What's the first part of that hadith?
If it's enough to eat just to keep the back straight.
Sorry?
If it's enough to eat just to keep the back straight.
It's enough to take a few morsels to keep the back straight. Now that's the first part of it. Keeping our back straight might be one of the most important things in terms of our maintenance of our well-being and health. It enables us to breathe. Sayyidina Musa, alayhi salam, in a tradition, it said that he asked Allah, what is your greatest hidden secret? And Allah responded, breath. Breath. We cannot breathe. Sitting in chairs. I've said this many, many times in my lectures for years and years. Sitting in chairs. And as we grow older, that's where we end up. And here's another. So what I want to do in today, in the short time I have, is one of the things I like to present are very basic principles of Hikma, and I like to do this as if it were a headline. One of the basic principles of the Hikma is, with breathing comes sensation. With breathing comes sensation. When we're not breathing, we don't have sensation. We cannot feel. That doesn't mean we just start breathing, although that's possible, because we've stopped breathing for good reasons. And what are the reasons we stop breathing? Why would we stop breathing during our life? Why would we stop breathing? To stop feeling. Because feeling is too difficult. It's overwhelming. To be or not to be. That is Sheikh Zubair's line. Huh? To be or not to be. Whether to stand in the face of the slings and arrows of life, that enable us to shut down, cause us to shut down, and not breathe. Every depressed person is only breathing that much. Breathing is life. How do we know a person's alive? The heartbeat, the breath. The more we breathe, the more we feel. They come together. Now that doesn't, as I say, it doesn't mean we just start breathing so that we can feel, because we've stopped feeling because it's not safe to breathe. It's not safe to be alive. It's too hard. We've been hurt. It's too scary, etc., etc. Or we get too angry, whatever. Are you all, you need a place, can you come and sit? It's hard to watch you. Well, I'm standing, so. Anyway. Okay, so I've jumped in, and there's many, many things I'd like to share. The basic thing I was beginning with here is this right brain, left brain. The model that I want to present and that I'm developing in the face of this Islamic psychology movement that's once again kind of being initiated by a new generation. You know, what is our Islamic psychology? And my line to all of these people, and I've been invited to give talks at the conferences on Islamic psychology. And basically, you know, my inclination to the Muslims who are involved in therapy. We have therapists in here, psychologists. So with due respect to psychology and the people that have done very good work and wonderful, positive work. You know, I've been trying to, in my own presentations, the last time I gave one in California at a conference, one of the things I said it would be nice if we could, as Muslims, if we could at least eliminate, to start with, this concept of mental health or mental illness. This is not in our tradition. Illness is not mental. It's illness and well-being has to do with our whole self. And that whole self, Sheikh Muhammad al-Habib, Ibn al-Arabi, Hakim Archuletta, many of these traditional scholars, Sheikh Habib said, what a wonderful thing the nafs is. What a wonderful thing the self is. In it is contained the entire universe. The entire universe. That's not a little statement. And if it's true, what does it mean? It means that what's inside of us is as vast as the universe out there in front of us. This is traditional. My teacher in Pakistan, my Hakim teacher, he said, everything that we find out there, we'll find in here. In perfect reflection. Every single process, every single concept, every single element, every single aspect. Perfect mirror one to the other, inward to the outward. Collected, gathered. A gathered separation. So one of the things I want to talk about more in more detail on the weekend workshop is how do we make use of this information in understanding one, ourselves, and if we're clinicians, how do we make use of this knowledge and this information or this model in understanding how we heal ourselves and others? If this is our deen, this is guidance for this last period of mankind, which we believe it is, then it behooves us to heal ourselves and the world as much as we're able to. We know that's only going to be within limits by Allah's design. But that means too that this deen and everything we've been given is not something from, you know, so many centuries past. It's something for now. For all the things we see out there, from this to this, all the insanity that we find out there. You with me? So how do we apply that to this? I suggest first of all we start with the model of the self. The modern neurology, the modern science, with the right brain, left brain, we know we have in our tradition something called the 1001 Nights. How many know the 1001 Nights? Have you read the 1001 Nights?
I'm not really, but I'm aware of it.
Sorry?
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, most of us are aware of it but haven't read it. Some have read parts of it. And we get bits and pieces of it from other sources. People refer to the 1001 Nights. But it's interesting that The modern neurologists have a term, and they call it the 1,000 days. And when I discovered this, I thought, subhanAllah, what an amazing thing that we've had this tradition for so long. And this particular tradition, the 1,001 Nights, do people know the principle, the construction of it? What's that?
If I recall correctly, there was a king who was, whose wife, I think, was not developing something, and then he ended up killing and remarrying every night.
That's right.
And I think it was Shahrazad. And
Shahrazad.
so there was a young girl who was a storyteller, and so every night she would tell the king a story and then not finish it, and then the king would say, finish the story, so she would say the next night.
Yes.
So by that way, he spared killing her, and then he mentioned 1,001 night.
And the point of it being that each story finished with incomplete. It kind of left you waiting like the serial. Someone said to me the other day, said it's like the TV series, When I was a kid, we used to go when I was very young, we used to go to the theater, the cinema, and they'd have these serials, westerns or some kind of, outer space things, and each story would end with disaster, and how this person going to get out of it, and it makes you want to go back for the next episode to find out, well, how do they get saved? And it draws you into the next. That was the 1,001 Nights. Each story would not fit. In the Masnavi, people know the Masnavi, yes? The Masnavi is the same. And the really beautiful, another beautiful one is from Fariduddin Attar called Ilahinama, in which one story is contained with another story, and each story leads to the next story. The other thing is the Panchatantra. I don't know if anyone knows that from the Hindu tradition. But each story is a piece of information and knowledge that adds to the previous one, and it's an ongoing serial. And that's a metaphor for the way we learn and we understand. And the 1,000 days that the neurologist refers to is, I call the 1,001 Nights. That's the period of time from the last trimester in our mother's womb to the first 2 years of life. And that's 1,000 days, more or less. And in that time, when we're in the mother's womb, and we begin in the last trimester to respond to the mother's voice, so that our musculature, our muscle groups are responding to the phonemes of her speech. We're learning from her. It's a lesson. And as we could say, it's a story that's unfolding for each day. But the speed at which it's taking place, the synaptic, people know the synaptic connections, the synaptic patterning, yes? I hope so. But that's, the nervous system as it develops as experience takes place, the synaptic patternings come into, they develop in patterns and structures. It's happening, what kind of rate of speed do you suppose that's happening in that 1,001 nights? From the last trimester and the first 2 years of life, any idea how rapid are those connections being made? How rapid is the information being assimilated and taken in? Any guesses? For those, maybe some of you know this. No? 70,000 connections per second. 70,000 per second. That's not a little number. To be honest, how do we even conceive of it? So that's taking place all that time. And during that time, our brain is not even, the human brain is still kind of smooth. It's not even developing until the first 2 years. And then language comes in, and then something different happens. With due respect to language. But basically what I'm saying is the data that we carry foundationally from that first 1,000 days to this time and all this time, the greater data, memory, we could say, the greater information contained within us is in our bodies, in the cells, in the nerves, and not up here in the skull, which has been the modern point of view. Not the traditional Islamic point of view. We had whole character, we had whole being, and we were not divided between the brain. In English, the word mind The word mind in English was originally more of a verb. Mind your manners, mind the gap, mind your elbow. Pay attention to something is what it meant. To direct your attention. So nowadays, we're coming more close to what was the traditional. Hakim Tirmidhi says our aqidah is not genuine until we embody it. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she said the Prophet ﷺ was the Quran walking. He was the Quran walking in a body. It came forth from him. And so much of it is not only in our DNA, but in every second, the 70,000 synaptic patterns, connections being made every second. It's in every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every year. And what does it say in Quran about the day of judgment in which every piece of our body will speak for us or against us? This is the affirmation of that principle. So what I'm saying to the clinicians and the psychologists is, yes, let's recognize, and this is another reason that we see, if you were to look at, for those of you who may be interested in psychology and for anyone who's maybe a psychologist, this is why we have hundreds of approaches to psychology. Hundreds of approaches, because what we're approaching is this vast reality inside. Cognitive behavioral therapy may be useful. All of these many different meditation, endless ways, and everybody comes along and says, this is the way you heal yourself. The self-help movement is huge because each one of them is, in some degree, has a degree of truth to it, because what we're doing is trying to access this vast reality. But I will suggest, and the work I do with people is not so much talk therapy. It's working with the body and working with sensations. Now another hikmah, another thing I can suggest here, the range of sensations that Allah has provided for us by the many, the millions of sensory nerves, the range of sensations are endless in number. Endless in number. Fuzzy, tingly, hot, cold, wet, dry, can feel all these things. And the more complex of these sensations, we call them emotions. Anger, happiness, sadness. These things want to change all the time. Only Allah remains. Only Allah remains. We are fluid. We're mostly fluid physically. But there's hadith, and I still have yet to find a scholar that can point me. This is a Moroccan scholar that told me that the Prophet ﷺ said the believer goes through 2,000 states in one day. And the non-believer can stay in one state for 2,000 days, God forbid. In the Quran it says they're like propped up blocks of wood. They're not alive. Being alive is, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm in love. Well, I hate that. And on and on and on. It's called being alive. My teacher taught, she said, healing has to do with coming back to life. The life that we left behind for others, for the circumstances we found ourselves in, that we shut down from experiencing because it was too difficult. We live in a time, now everybody knows this term, fight, flight, freeze. I think everybody knows that. We live in a world of freeze. Everybody's shut down. It's no accident that they keep remaking these movies called the Return of the Dead, the zombie. Basically, why do they keep remaking it? Because that's expressing what's going on in the world. People are not alive anymore. So one thing, people, anybody know Mary Oliver, the poet? Great poet. Allah bless her, she died last year. But she has a poem, and in the poem she says something like, you're young, so you think you know everything. And when you get in your boat and you begin to row, are you familiar with this poem? No. She says, when you get in your boat and you begin to row, let me tell you that anything other than love is not worth a penny. Something I'm paraphrasing. And she says, when you're rowing and you hear up ahead the sound and the roar of the white water in the falls, the rumbling, the sound of that thing that that the river is taking you towards. She said, then row for your life towards it. Engage in life. Engage in life. This is courage. To engage in life and become alive. Breathe. Be with each other. One of the things I stress is this loss of connection. I have a list of things that we don't realize the kind of connection we realize that we've lost connection in the sense of community. I mean, here amongst you, many of you have a really remarkable gift by Allah. And by people who understand the value of this, the ability to create some sort of community. There's so much I'd like to share with you around all these topics. I'll try to do more on Saturday if you want to come to the workshops, and we'll do some experiential things as well to sort of get a sense in our bodies of what I'm talking about. And I try to give people the sort of clues and the keys for them to do and begin this work on their own. One of the basic things I try to give as a takeaway is notice what's taking place in your body. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, 3 things bring coolness to my eye. And the coolness to his eye was not just his eye, it's a state of being, yes? That's what it means. It means a state. And he said, the green of nature, the running water, and a beautiful face. Now this is our legacy, our birthright. We see a beautiful face, mashallah, we see the beautiful face, we respond. And it's more than our eye, it's our state of being. But he's pointing out something the modern neurologists now call neuroception or interoception. That is, we see and experience, and something happens inside of us. Mary Oliver, the poet, she said, Allah bless her, she said every one of us is a poet because every one of us experiences the world and the reality in a very unique way. And the poet's just the one that expresses it. The artist, the singer, and the person that communicates with others generously. Just gives out. In the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah says, for those, Dalikat Katab, says, for those who give out from what Allah has given them. Responding to the other with a smile is our sadaqah. The Prophet ﷺ, they say when he was alone, he was grave. And when he was with people, he smiled and gave out with generosity. This is our nature. So again, there's so much I'd like it. The ways in which we've offended our fitrah are huge. Huge. And we can regain it all. We can regain this. Allah is generous. He's the oft-returning. He forgives everything. I have people that come into me from the most dire circumstances for healing. And the first thing they want to get a handle on is this can all be changed. Oh, well, I'm so old now. No, Allah's generous. I'm old too, but I'm not giving up. I'm continuing to work on this. So, yeah, as I say, there's so much I'd like to share. This vast self that develops over a long period of time. It means that every single thing, every single event, however minor it may seem, that takes place by Allah's command, first of all. We know this from our Aqidah. We know everything only happens by His command. And yet we don't look at the random thing that happens as being, sometimes we do, sometimes we recognize it because it's so unique. I remember a man I met he had just become a new Muslim, and he was telling me the story about him going through some really difficult times in his life. And he was divorcing, and he was in just misery. And he was, beside himself and in grief and upset. And he heard the trash man coming, and he said, "Oh, I didn't put the trash out." So he ran out and said to the man, "Hang on a minute," and went to the garage to get the trash, and he went to get so he could put it out for the man to take. And he got it, and he turned around, and the trash man was in his garage, and the man said, here, I'll take it from him. And then the trash man said, don't worry, it'll all be okay. This happens every single minute, every single day, and we don't recognize it. Every single thing, Allah is generous beyond counting. He's generous beyond counting. And so things that seem, one of the shuyukh in Morocco said, oh, good, when you think all this spiritual stuff's taking place in you, don't be so sure. It might be that time when you say, well, nothing's really happening. I feel so spiritually, people come to me all the time, they say things like, well, I'm so, I'm remiss in my spirituality. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know about that. You never know. Because what Allah is giving us at any given time, we can't know it until we know it. We can't know it until we know it. Disaster is one of our great teachers, we know that. One of my prayers that Allah help us to heal ourselves and each other as much as possible, that we don't have to be healed by your Jalali nature, which we know is His way. Anytime there's disaster, the Rahmah descends. People come together. They support each other. They help each other. It's true for all illness. People who get, how many people I think, for the many years I've practiced, who have cancer, and they say, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it woke them up to what they'd done in their life and what they didn't do in their life. People who come to me and they're drug addicts or they're criminals and things, and I say, look, one thing you must know by Allah's nature is that experience is not the opposite of purity. This is a deep hikmah. Experience is not the opposite of purity and innocence. You have within you, by your fitrah, more innocence when you return to it, and more purity when you return to it, than you ever had before, than you had when you were a child. And if you've gone off the path, and the Quran it says that when you lose your way on the path and you come back, Allah brings you back at a higher maqam, a higher station. That's not a bad deal. Almost one of maybe we should just, it doesn't work that way, of course. But coming back and returning, all of that can be, because He forgives everything except shirk. Everything. These things are details. Okay, I was a drug addict. I was a criminal. I used to steal from people. It doesn't matter. We know the story of the man who had killed 90-something. The famous hadith, he killed all those people. So these things are in our teachings, but we want to be able to look deeply enough to make use of them and apply them. Prophet ﷺ said, we only need a few morsels. So that's got a lot of information in there. We don't need to eat 3 meals a day. Hello. Someone came in to me once and said, I'd want to meet you, I'm going to talk to you about, because I teach prophetic nutrition. And I said, oh, what do you mean, not eating anything at all? And she was a little upset, God bless her. She's a really sweet woman, really good and sincere. But, prophetic smoothies are not my idea. But not eating is what it's about. Not eating. Not eating at all. 1 meal a day. OMAD. People know OMAD? OMAD? 1 meal a day? My wife and I have done it for years. Best we can. There's times when that croissant is just, I can't resist it. So, eating little is part of that hadith. Only a few morsels. That was the way of the Prophet ﷺ. Fasting. And eating very little. Some research, someone was saying that Cadbury's, people know Cadbury's, right? The Brits here know Cadbury's very well. They invented this term snacks. You go anywhere in the world right now, and if you stop at a gas station and you're going, what is there? Thousands of snacks. Someone said, how many people dig their graves with their teeth? It's not the way, traditionally. The way traditionally, it's not even maybe to see breakfast is the most important. I don't want to get into that whole thing of nutrition, but I think a lot of you know that because the computer, internet savvy that's coming about, the biohackers, in which people are learning and know more than their doctors do, so they go to their doctor and say, well, what about this? And the doctor doesn't know what they're talking about. because he's too busy with so many patients, with due respect to the doctors who have a predicament, and I feel badly for them. Because they're at the mercy of the drug companies. I'm sorry to say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but people come to me, and the less medication they've had, the healthier they will be, and the more easily they will be healed of whatever the problem might be. Doctors coming to me with a list of 15, 20 medicines they're taking. And I call them and I said, well, you know what this is going to do? They know, but somehow we can't move out of this. Principles, we're people of principles. We're people of principles, and we must base our activity and actions and work in the world on these principles that we believe in. Not willy-nilly, or that chaotic, this works for that and therefore use it for that, and this, coincidentally we discover what brings the blood pressure down or whatever. Wisdom has principles that we can hold to. One of the principles of Hikma is that every symptom that we experience that we can call symptom, be it emotional, physical, mental, whatever you want to call it, any problem we have, when people come to me and they say, I have anxiety and I have depression, part of me says, Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, you have anxiety and depression. That means it's not okay to be in this world that is totally insane. And it's not okay that you settle for what's happened to you. But, you have in you these basic principles. The principles being our fitrah. Our fitrah, what is our fitrah? We must know what that is. Imam al-Ghazali said, we are mammals. And we have all the qualities of a mammal. He didn't say that specifically, but that's, he said we are animals. We must respect that. We do not deny our animal nature. Rather, we understand it and make use of it. In one example, in which he said, it's like a rider on a horse. Our body is our horse, and our being and soul is our rider. Does it take us to what we want? How do we treat it? Does it behave? Does it stall? Does it buck us off? Does it drag us by the stirrup? All of these are metaphors for states of being. Every single thing. And that's why Prophet ﷺ said, goodness is with the forelock of the horse. And he added to that really important, until the end of time. That's now. Right? These little details sometimes are keys and clues to deep wisdoms that we may overlook. Teach your children to ride horses. How often do we have horses now? It used to be horses were part of the the developed world, even in the cities, horse and carriages, until Mr. Ford and those guys did their thing.